Hi-ya-ya.
Right. So welcome to another episode of On the Spectrum podcast. I am Nick.
And I'm Steve.
And as always, we do not presume to be experts in anything whatsoever. We are just two human beings who happen to be on the autism spectrum, and we're going to talk about stuff that not only affects the autistic community, but things we like.
Well, I'm on the autistic spectrum. Nick is kind of questionable now after my tincture has been doing its work.
Wait,
so.
You're going to start the episode talking about your quote-unquote autism cure?
Yeah.
Jesus.
This episode is brought to you by Autism Speaks.
Oh, God, he's gonna do it. This episode is not actually brought to you by Autism Speaks. Steve has one heck of a smile on his face.
That's why I'm working on the cure, man.
Yeah, that's it.
The anti-MMR.
The anti-MMR.
It's not brought to you by Autism Speaks. It's brought to you by Jenny McCarthy.
Oh.
Didn't she not believe that anymore?
I don't know.
I thought she stopped with the whole autism vaccine thing.
I mean, she was pretty vocal about it for a while.
Yeah, and is she still with Jim Carrey?
What?
She was with Jim Carrey before, right?
Jenny McCarthy?
Yeah.
No.
Who was she married to?
She was married to Donnie Wahlberg, I thought.
Are you sure?
She's on The Masked Singer.
Jim Carrey. Who's Jim Carrey with?
I don't know. I don't keep track of who Jim Carrey has sex with.
Neither do I. I don't know what I'm talking about, apparently.
So
he's with Lauren Holly.
Oh.
No, he's not with anybody.
Okay. Well, bravo.
He was married to Melissa Warmer and Lauren Holly.
Okay. Yeah,
I thought he was dating. Yeah, they were together. The two never actually got married, apparently, but they were together.
Okay. Well, I'm glad we figured out that mystery.
Yeah. So today we're talking about power, hierarchy, and authority. And the reason...
Power, hierarchy, and authority.
And some people might be confused by that. How does that relate to autism?
I would like to know.
I'm going to tell you.
Please do.
So I think that this is a common struggle. We've touched on some of this before in previous episodes, especially when we're talking about when we brought up working in the past, like being employed, how unemployment's a big problem for people on the spectrum. And maybe another episode we'll delve into like support, like unemployment and some of the other like issues that disproportionately affect people who are on the spectrum. But we're not necessarily going to talk about that today. But I think some of the reasons why people get into trouble besides the obvious social issues, a lot of people who are in positions of power or authority think that people who are on the spectrum don't respect hierarchy. And I think some of that could be true because I think that people who are on the spectrum sometimes have a hard time navigating or understanding hierarchy, understanding why certain power structures exist, or maybe just ignoring them. So, for instance, and I've done this myself, a lot of times if you are trying to get something done that's related to work, and whoever it is that's supposed to do that particular thing, if for some reason they're not getting back to you or they're not responding or you can't get it done with them, you'll go to the next person. And a lot of times that will upset people if they think you're jumping hierarchy, if you're skipping over the chain of command.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that gets people into trouble. Another thing would be asking a lot of questions. So I know like I've been accused in the past of not respecting, either being incompetent, that I didn't know what I was doing, or that I was stupid, or that I was questioning authority just because I was asking a lot of questions. So I like to clarify and I like specifics and I like details. And if somebody asks me to do something or they give me a project to work on, I like to ask a lot of questions so I understand what their expectations are.
Right.
But a lot of times people will interpret that as me either being stupid or incompetent because they expect me to make assumptions about those things, or that I'm questioning them or their authority just in general because I'm asking too many questions, so they think I'm questioning them. Right. And I think that's something that happens to a lot of other people that are autistic. I don't think that that's just a me thing.
No, I think you're absolutely right. And I think you touched on kind of one of the main reasons for that is because we're looking for clarity. We're looking for an understanding of expectation and boundaries, if you will, in some degree. And then that other person is like, well, how come you just don't know? Well, because we're not you people.
Or we don't want to just assume.
Right. We don't want to assume.
A lot of people expect you to make assumptions about things, or they want you to just, so a lot, I've had to actually train myself to just say fuck it and just do things.
Right.
So a lot of times in jobs now, especially when I work in positions of power myself when I'm part of the structure of power. Right now, I work directly under the owner of a company. So I'm one of his second in commands, basically. Right. And I have a bunch of people who work under me. And the owner of a company is going to expect you in that position to just make decisions.
Right.
And I can't ask him about every single thing. I sometimes will ask a couple questions just to understand the basics, and anything else I'll just do with whatever. I'll use my judgment. And I think that making judgment calls is something that doesn't come easy to people on the spectrum when it relates to other people. It's just going with our instinct and trusting our thoughts on it and just going with it. Right. Because we feel like we don't understand what other people's expectations are. But it's something I personally have had to work on quite a bit because it got me in trouble. It comes into conflict usually when it's in a work environment.
Right. And I'm completely with you on it. When it comes to like having to make those decisions and things, like for most of our lives, whether we knew we were on the spectrum or not, for most of our lives, people were second guessing what our choices were anyway, because they wanted us to choose one thing. We choose another thing based on us and the way we think about things, but they expected a totally different direction. So we almost always, or often enough, we've been questioned on our choices so often that it becomes almost a paralysis of making a decision in that way.
Well, I think that's something that a lot of normies also deal with too, is
to a degree,
lack of confidence in your own decisions or questioning yourself. So people who are less assertive, if you're somebody who hasn't worked in management before and then you get promoted to management, that's something that a lot of people struggle with. So not just people on the spectrum, but people in general deal with questioning their decision making and not having some of that confidence. So that's something that's kind of universal. But I think the parts that might be more specific to autistic people is like they asking so many questions to the point where people think you're stupid or incompetent.
Right.
Or that
how come you can't just figure it out?
Yeah.
Because you didn't tell me how to figure it out.
So that's one of those areas where...
But you didn't tell me how long the ditch, you didn't tell me how deep the ditch, didn't tell me how wide the ditch needs to be, you didn't tell me what purpose the ditch has.
Yeah, and then that's another thing is I'm lucky enough that a lot of the companies I worked for recently haven't been this way. I've had bosses who are more understanding, but in the past I've worked for people who, if you want to understand the reason why for something, that would they would irritate them. They just want you to just do it.
Right.
But I feel like a lot of people, I don't think this is just a me thing either, but I think a lot of people who are on the spectrum also feel a need to understand the reason behind things. And if we don't have a reason why, we don't know the reason behind something, it's hard for us to justify doing the thing.
Yes.
And that's why we get in trouble with authority quite a bit.
I agree with you. We shouldn't necessarily speak for everybody on the spectrum, but I'm right there with you. I'm the same way. Like if you don't give me a purpose, and I used to have a problem with, I need to be able to agree with the purpose or the reason why. Nowadays, just give me a reason why. Like, give me something to hold on to so I can say to myself, this is why I'm doing this way.
This, for me, it's also a practical thing because if you're entrusting me, you're giving me a certain level of responsibility. You're trusting me to do something. Even if not, but whatever. Maybe you're not trusting me to do something. But if I'm doing something and you want me to do something, regardless of the reason, it could be a spouse, could be a friend, could be a boss, but I don't understand the reason behind why you want it, or why you want it done a certain way. If something arises or if there's a problem and I don't understand the reason behind it, it's going to be potentially more difficult for me to come up with a solution to fix the problem if I don't understand the reason why you made the decisions you made in the first place. Because then I might make a decision to fix it a certain way that actually impacts the reason why or that affects the reason why you chose it to do a certain way to begin with. But I don't have that information. So for me, it's kind of a practical thing. If I understand the reason why for something, then I can help prevent mistakes, or I can also prevent future mistakes. Like if it's a policy thing, you put a certain policy into place and understand the reason behind the policy. I can, or the reason why, even like when mistakes happen, right? If you make a mistake, it's not just important to say that you made a mistake at a job or anything. It's also important for the person who made the mistake to understand, and the person who's in charge of them to understand why.
Right.
Does the person who made the mistake understand why they made that mistake? And does the person in charge of them understand why? And I've never been a fan of, and I've explained this to people I've worked for before. Hey man, it's not enough to just understand that somebody made a mistake. You also need to understand why they made that mistake to prevent them from doing it again in the future.
And also identifying the difference between somebody making just a human error or if it's actually a mistake that needs to be corrected.
But a lot of people don't care about the why.
No.
And I don't understand why they don't care about the why. I worked for bosses who were fucking shitheads and brain dead. And I'm like, yes, someone made a mistake. Good. But do you understand why they made the mistake? And they said they don't care. Well, I'm like, but if you don't care and you don't know the reason why, then how can you prevent them from doing it again in the future?
So hold on. So I will say on that though, sometimes it's not even important why it happened or that we know who did it, but that we put something in place to correct it or to make sure.
Well, so you could say, well, anytime someone makes that same mistake, I'll just bitch at them again. But that's not always going to work, and that doesn't always solve the problem. So you can just say, well, if somebody makes a mistake, we're going to write them up, or we're going to do some sort of disciplinary action. Or if you're a parent and your kid does something wrong, you can just tell them they did something wrong. But if the kid doesn't understand why, if you don't understand why the kid's doing it, so there could be things that are contributing to that thing happening,
right?
That you're not taking into consideration because you don't care about the why.
So, but that's why I brought up that sometimes it's just a matter of human error and not about somebody not knowing something or a lack of training or something. It's just a human error.
But that would still be part of the why.
Yeah, you're right.
Why is it just a mistake, or is there something that's contributing to this mistake that could happen again? Or is it a pattern already where this keeps happening? Right. Why does this keep happening? Instead of just saying, well, you're a shithead, stop doing that.
Well, like in my line of work, there's often times where it doesn't actually matter why. That like the reasoning that somebody had, the series of events that led up to the mistake happening, none of that is important. Everybody just now needs to be on the same page that we will not do that again. Under any circumstance, we're just not going to do it. And so like, even when
I'm looking at it from more of like from usually where in positions that I work in, it's more of a behavioral thing where I'm dealing with a person individually.
Right.
And if I'm coaching somebody or trying to help somebody grow and get better, I can't just, most of the time it's not effective to just say, don't do that again. You can, but I think in tandem with that, you also need to try to understand why.
And that's my opinion. I agree with you. Like 90% of mistakes that people make, and especially when on the job, a lot of that, absolutely. We figure out why, we retrain necessarily, or we have a conversation about what led up to it, and we kind of pick it apart a little bit. And I agree with that. Oh, for the most part, like 90% of the time, that's the action you take, right? That's what's needed in it. But I think there are times too that like knowing the why and then spending the extra time to train somebody or retrain somebody in something isn't necessarily needed either.
It depends on what it is.
Yes.
I'm just speaking in general.
Right. And I'm trying to give a little bit more.
Because there could be, a lot of times there are things that you may know or you may not know. But if you do even the smallest amount of investigation, just asking some questions to try to figure out why, you can prevent a lot of those problems from happening in the future.
Yes,
just by spending a couple minutes just looking into it.
Right.
That's all I'm saying. But a lot of people I've worked for, and they were not, neurotypical folk who just didn't give a shit or didn't understand.
Or at least we assume that they're neurotypical people.
Didn't seem to see any value in trying to understand why people are doing certain things.
Sure.
They just cared about whether they did it or not.
Well, I mean, I will say this. When I was a retail manager, I didn't give a shit why. I didn't give a shit why somebody didn't fucking do something in their job correctly. Because it's retail. Like, for one, there's 1,000 other people right behind them who want a fucking job. There's tons of applications all the time. So I didn't actually give a shit in a lot of ways. I mean, I'm much more of a dick of a boss than you are. Or at least I used to be much more of a dick of a boss than you are currently. And so I didn't really care a lot of the times. No, you know what you need to do. You need to do it this way. Go get it done.
I think it fosters a better work environment.
Sure.
In my opinion.
And in certain work environments, that's good.
A boss who tries to work with you and tries to be understanding and take things into consideration. And yes, things have to be done a certain way. And yes, you will receive some type of disciplinary action, possibly if you don't do things the way they're supposed to be done. But you also need to, like, especially if multiple people are having the same problem all the time, well, there might be something here that's causing this to happen.
So that right there, though, if multiple people are having are doing things, incorrectly the same way, to me, that's automatically a management training issue. Like automatically, if you have multiple people that are making the same mistake, or at least, multiple people doing things, not the way in which you'd want them to do them. I think that right there is a leadership
I've had issues with that
issue
recently. And so my approach to that is like, well, if all the people that are working with me are not doing what the company wants them to do,
right?
I look at it as, well, we need to find some way to motivate them to do it. Let's try to make it easier for them, because I'm looking at it and like, well, why are they not doing it? Yeah. Well, it's tedious, or there's different things that are making it difficult for them to do. So rather than do it, they try to avoid it because it's a pain in the ass.
Right.
So my way of dealing with it and that approach is, okay, well, I'm going to try to make it easier for them to actually do the task we want them to do. So they have less reason to say, less reasons to give for excuses. I'm making it easier for you, and I can make it fun even. By making it easier, making it fun, making it more engaging, then they're more likely to do it.
I've never understood people's obsession with wanting their job to be fun. It's your job. Just go do it.
Yeah, but that's how people are.
Like, if you want something fun, go get a hobby. Put your passion, your energy into something you care about. That
if people can't understand why, understanding the why is important. Look at all the mass shootings.
Oh, come on. You're going to go to that? We're talking about employment and
right, but I'm saying
leadership, and then you're going to go to mass shooting.
I'm saying on an extreme level.
Yes.
Like, it's not just enough to say mass shooting bad. Person shot people bad.
No, absolutely. I agree. We need to know more of why. And I think the simplistic way that we're looking at it currently in our society about mass shootings, I think, is really cutting ourselves short.
Guns don't kill people. People kill people.
That's a true statement too.
Or whatever it is. Some people want to either blame guns, or they want to blame,
or just mental health.
Yeah.
No, it's a combination of a bunch of stuff, I think. And I think some of it is actually part of our American culture. I think a lot of it that leads to it.
Yeah, cultural.
I think there's a lot of things that reinforce the idea of actually doing that stuff in our culture. And I know somebody's probably going to be like, what? No, everybody's against mass shooting. You're right. Everybody is against it. But there are things in which are in our society that
but your fucking 5-year-old simplistic analysis isn't helping.
Right. Yeah. I fucking hate the simplisticness of it. Well, it's mental health. Well, okay, so what are we going to do about it? And
in the same token, just saying, well, it's guns.
Yeah.
Because there's plenty of people who have guns that this doesn't happen to.
Right.
And usually people who are doing these things aren't even using their own guns. They're stealing other people's guns.
And they're getting them illegally.
Yeah.
And then people say, well, we need to have tighter gun controls on it. They didn't care about what gun control laws we have now, let alone what ones you will create, because they're stealing the weapons from somebody, guns from somebody else. My brother hates it when I call them weapons, but guns from somebody else.
Well, the only way to really solve that problem entirely would be to just take away everybody's guns. And then I'm not saying that
was kind of effective in Australia.
Yeah. It would work. I mean, people would still commit violent acts. They would just do it other ways. It's just obviously having a gun or a semi-automatic rifle is a more effective means of killing people. It's more efficient.
Or it's more public too. I got to point this out. It's more public too.
You could always go the Timothy McVeigh way.
Oh, and just blow stuff up.
Yeah. Which is what people do if they don't have guns. They'll just blow shit up.
Right.
Because you can make a bomb easily. Hope the FBI is not listening to this.
Or poison people or whatever.
It's pretty easy to, but yeah, a gun is easier. You just pick up a gun and just start firing.
Plus it's you get more attention out of it. And I think there is a level of trying to get attention. I think the attention isn't necessarily, oh, look at me, I'm doing this violent thing. But I think the person is, for the most part, I'm not talking about every single mass shooter, but when it comes to some of them, I think it literally is nobody paid attention to me. Everybody acted as if I didn't exist. I'm invisible. And so it is an act of somebody pay attention to me. Yeah. And I don't mean that in like a whiny, pity kind of way.
So I guess my point is that if you go to the extreme, you can see why understanding the why is important. But I think on a smaller level, it's also important when you're dealing with people day to day. But a lot of neurotypical people that I've dealt with over the years have found my need to understand why to be irritating, annoying, weird, or they think that I'm MR. They call me all these different things. Yeah. Part of it is because why are you asking so many questions and why do you need to understand everything?
Right.
Because I don't know, I just fucking do.
Yeah.
It's like if I get into those situations where I'm working, even if I'm not a manager or a boss, if I'm even just an underling and you give me a task to do, shit doesn't always go according to plan. But if I understand your reasoning and why we're doing something a certain way, that better informs me to make a decision when something doesn't go the right way. Because now I understand the purpose behind what you wanted to do.
Speaking all of this, and it just came to mind, I just recently had to do a diversity training at my job.
Jesus.
And one of the things.
Wait, what is a diversity training?
Well, so they're talking about how people have different cultures and different
Oh,
backgrounds.
they're teaching you about the people are different? Yeah, I didn't know that.
But in that, talking about diversity training.
Is it like diversity sensitivity?
Not quite that far, but it's more of just be aware of. So anyway, it's a fucking training from a corporation, dude.
I just don't, I don't understand the purpose of that.
Anyway,
okay.
So what I'm getting at with it though is when I see those trainings, they're almost always talking about other types of diversity in the workplace. I've never once seen, and because our podcast is focused on autism, I've never once heard them talk about that difference. Accepting other people's different way of learning, other people's different way of looking. So you think that
people who are in positions of authority at companies, if you're higher up, if you're a CEO, if you're a boss, if you're an owner, you should be aware of neurodiversity and take those things into account a little bit.
Yes, absolutely take it into account because quite honestly, you don't know what that person is. And generally when people are talking about like diversity training at a corporation, at a job, like they're talking about the visible.
They're talking about not getting sued for discrimination.
Yes, exactly. But like even with people with mental health issues.
Although there was a woman who was recently sued a company for a lot of money who was autistic. And she disclosed to them she was autistic.
Yep.
They complained about the way she was writing emails. She asked them how she would like them to write the emails.
Right.
They didn't give her any sort of direction on it. She told them that she was autistic.
Yeah.
She continued to do the job and they kept writing her up. They fired her and she kept asking for help and guidance on it. They didn't give it to her. And then she sued them and won because they were discriminating against her for being autistic. But she asked several times like, okay, well, how do you want me to format these emails? How do you want me? But they didn't like the way she was communicating with people. But the way that she was talking to people in emails was probably a result of her being autistic.
Right.
But she asked for help. Like, tell me how you want me to do it. And they didn't give her any guidance. They just, well, you should know.
Yeah. I once heard from a boss, and this was after I got my bachelor's degree. I once heard from a boss, you should know how to write. You went to college. Okay, I do know how to structure a sentence, and I did go to college, and I did submit papers, but that doesn't mean I write the way you want me to write. And so I've actually been in that situation. Now I have to do a lot of clinical language because of what I do.
I communicate better writing than I do verbally.
Yeah, you really do. The fact that when we ever have little tiffs with one another,
it's easier for me to organize my thoughts.
Yeah.
When I speak, I tend to stutter or stumble over my words a lot more. Yeah. Versus when I write things down, I write very quickly. Like I'll write stuff very fast, but I'm able to structure my words in a way that makes more sense, especially to other people who don't like if I was trying to express myself, if I was going to write a love letter to somebody, it'd be much easier for me to tell somebody how much I love and appreciate them if I was writing it versus just saying it.
See, and I'm kind of opposite of that. I'm much better when I talk. Like to me, typing and sitting down to work out something on paper, if you will, it's a lot longer of a process for me, and it's a lot harder for me to get everything I want to get out.
What I'm saying is I mask better when I write because it was much more obvious to people that I was different when I spoke to them or dealt with them in person versus when they dealt with me via like email or text messaging. People had a different impression of me when they read what I wrote to them via email and text messages or through things that I wrote, poetry, whatever, versus when they spoke to me in person, the two people seemed different to them. So it was much more obvious that I was quote unquote weird or they would call me weird, eccentric, whatever.
You just kind of proposed something interesting there. I just had to think about that because you said you mask better when you write. And I had to think about that. Do I mask better when I talk? And that's why I'm more comfortable with it because I feel like people understand me better verbally. And I think there's a level to that. I think there is a piece to that I mask better when I talk. I mean, granted, I've never once heard somebody
I also don't have to worry about
identify my autistic moments.
I don't have to worry about eye contact. I don't have to worry about certain things when I'm writing.
Yeah.
So if I'm writing an email to my employees, for instance, it's much easier for me to if I'm asking them to do something and I have to communicate with them all at once, it's much easier for me to just send them an email and then follow up with them later with a phone call versus me trying to talk to them all in person at once. Because I feel that sometimes I don't communicate myself as clearly when I'm communicating.
Right.
But if I can send out the email first, it lays out everything clearly, and then I can just reference and ask questions if they need clarification after that.
I have a much harder time when I'm writing, when I'm typing. I have a much harder time getting all of it out because I'm so succinct when I write. Like, I've always been told that I'm so minimalistic when I write because I'm just so I'm so succinct. I'm so short when I write. I always feel like I'm never giving enough. But when I write it, I feel like I express myself completely. And then somebody reads it and they're like, well, what about this? What about that? Well, no, I meant all this much more to it. And so when I talk, I feel like I can completely get more of it out. Granted, I've also been accused of lecturing people all the time when I talk. So there's that too.
So did you have, I'm assuming you've had some of the same problems with authority or power figures that I have.
Yeah.
Did you have the same issues in university or the military?
So not in the military per se. And that was a weird situation. I mean, for one, at the time, I didn't know I was autistic. So a lot of the sensory stuff that I was dealing with, a lot of the proximity to people physically and a lot of the touch stuff, like I didn't know that was necessarily, sensory issues with me. I thought
you had a thing. You're just like, I just have a thing. I don't like that.
And so I didn't necessarily have issues with authority in the sense of like they accused me of being obstinate or something like that, but I
didn't call you a homo habilis or call you retarded.
No, well, not in the military. But I just ended up at some point starting to get panic attacks anytime I saw like officer ranks on somebody's chest, where the rank would be in the middle of the chest. I started to get panic attacks when I'd get near him because I didn't know what to do and I didn't want to say the wrong thing and I wasn't sure what to say and I wasn't sure how to behave. And so I was really pent up and I'd get panic attacks from it. And it didn't really get better before I left the military. But I will say that because I had the experience of being in the military and kind of having to pack away a lot of those feelings and thoughts and anxiety and all that, and just kind of had to manage it in the moment, I have come out of that being able to manage a lot better when it comes to dealing with things. I mean, I've always had issues with authority, if you will, or at least always accused of having issues with authority because I always question things. Like you were saying, asking questions about a lot of stuff, but also because I have a tendency, and
people
this too.
People don't like to be questioned.
Right.
A lot of times they want you to just do it.
Yeah. Like you've probably noticed this in me too. I have a tendency of saying things matter-of-factly, like very matter-of-factly, as if I'm right and nobody else is right. And I don't believe I'm always right. I've never believed I was always right. I don't believe I'm the smartest person in the room ever. But people have accused me of, well, you sounded as if you just knew. You were just so confident when you said it. No, it's because of the way I word it. I sound very matter-of-factly. In fact, like there are times where I word things and I'm asking a question, but people don't know I'm asking a question because of the way I worded it and because of my inflection. It doesn't sound like I asked a question. It sounded like I told somebody.
Yeah.
I get accused of that a lot by partners.
I think it's, I mean, I was talking a lot about work.
Yeah.
And about I asked you about university and military, but it's also family too. Like I know growing up, I used to annoy the shit out of my parents all the time because
me too.
They would ask me to do things or they would give me answers for things that didn't make any sense to me. Right. And I kept asking them questions about it until I drove them nuts and they wanted to fucking lock me in my room because, I want to do a certain thing or I want to do this. And then they gave me some bullshit reason. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make any sense. And I explain all the reasons why that doesn't make sense. I'm like, so you told me this, you told me no for these reasons, but these reasons obviously don't make any sense. They're not valid. Right. And they're just like, shut the fuck up, kid. Because they just want you to just accept it and go away.
So I will say, and that is kind of a normal kid thing to do. But the difference is, being autistic, that doesn't go away for us.
But I also used to
ask a shit ton of questions.
I think I was a little extreme because I would sit there and bug my mom for like literally, I'm not exaggerating, like sometimes for an hour or multiple hours about something.
I may have, I don't know actually if I did that or not when I was younger. I may have, I probably did. What's up? All right. Every time your attention gets pulled out of one of the windows.
Tony was walking through the yard.
Oh, okay. Anytime I see your attention go pulled in another direction, I'm like, oh, is this something I got to be concerned with?
My autism is tingling. I saw something in my periphery vision and it made me turn my head.
Yeah. So yes. So when it comes to hierarchy, help explain that part too, because this is kind of your topic this week. So
I thought it ties into power and authority. Obviously, hierarchy is structure.
Right.
And I think a lot of times, speaking from my own experience in the autistic people that I do know, it seems to other people
Yeah.
that autistic people have no respect for structure of authority, the hierarchy that exists there, the hierarchy of power, the hierarchy of authority,
Yeah.
which I mentioned at the beginning about, jumping over the chain of command,
Right.
or things like that. We also tend to be kind of, when it comes to political beliefs, we tend to, I think a lot of us tend to have issues with political hierarchy, political authority, political power.
Well, it seems like it, and I think it seems like it ties into what you were talking about before of like needing to know why. Because if you think about it, a lot of people on the spectrum are very task focused, right?
And we do
it's
like
about getting it done.
A lot of us do like structure. I mean, it's kind of a stereotype that people who are autistic like routine and they like structure, right?
Right.
You don't like a lot of chaos, but that's not always true.
We do like that stuff.
Yeah.
In fact, we thrive best on it. In fact, all humans thrive best under structure,
right?
Under routine.
There is such a thing as having too much structure.
There is,
to a point where it gets oppressive or holds you back, or restricts you too much.
Right. And I agree.
There's a balance between, it's the old yin and yang, the old idea of chaos and order, the balance of having both.
So I actually, when it comes to this topic of power and hierarchy and like jumping chain of command and stuff, I actually have, and this is a personal thing for me, I don't know if anybody else is like that. If you do agree with what I'm about to say, give me a comment. Let me know I'm not alone. But I kind of have this thing where no matter who, no matter what authority they think they have, no matter what position they have, no matter what, title they have, I don't necessarily give a shit about any of that, the authority that they perceive or what their job title allows them or whatnot. I only really do what they're asking me to do if I agree with it, if I'm willing to do it. Right. And like some people will do it because they're worried they're going to get written up by their boss or whatever. But I kind of have this thing about it. Like we all have choices to make in life and everything is a choice we make. And so we've got to own the choices and the decisions that we make. And so when
you have a hard time doing things just for the sake of doing them.
Yes. So I have to agree. Like,
if you're in the military, if they tell you to dig a hole, it doesn't fucking matter why they ask you to dig the hole. You got to dig the hole.
Right. But that was part of the issue that I had in the military too, was because now it's a period of time in my life, a couple of years there where
will make you do shit that doesn't really have a reason for it.
I had to do things, but at the same time though, I chose to go into the military. And so in that choice, there were times where I was asked to do things, and instead of arguing and instead of asking why, instead of, talking about it, I just had to remind myself, you chose to be here, Nick. You chose to be here. And so own that. This is part of the job. This is what you volunteered to do. This is what you chose to do.
I think it extends even further than it's basically everything, because I talked about parents, talked about work, talked about, and it extends even to me for like when I was in grade school, just me always questioning my teachers. And I was probably annoying as fuck, but I asked a lot of questions because I wanted to understand things better. But I also asked a lot of questions because certain things didn't make sense to me.
Right.
Or if I thought the teacher was wrong about something, I'd ask questions, but which occasionally they are, but everybody's occasionally wrong. But it's just one of those things where I have a need to understand why. I have a need to understand reality and the truth behind things. And if I don't like not understanding something or why something not understanding how something works, why something works.
I'm actually really bad at, and it might not ever seem like it to you, or maybe it does, but I'm actually really bad at just going with the flow, just going with it. I'm actually really bad with that. Like I've got to figure out how to justify going with the flow in some way.
Well, you should ask your wife
if I'm good at just going with things.
No, how to go with the flow.
Oh, well, I do. There are times where I actually like completely defer to her about how to behave and what we should do about something. Whether I agree with her or not, I just kind of defer to her because she might know better in that way. Like the phrase, pick your battles has always been super hard for me. Very, very hard for me to understand that. Very hard for me to kind of go with that. Pick your battles. But there are times now, I respect my partner in the sense of she might know better than me in that moment. So I kind of listen to her. If she says, let it alone, leave it alone, move on from it, just do it this way. It'll smooth things over. I listen to her. I give her that level of respect that she might know better than I do in that moment when it comes to social stuff.
So
Well, actually, in a lot of ways.
I was going to pose something to you,
Okay.
but I'm thinking about maybe rephrasing it. So I was going to ask you about
Okay.
what do you think if we were to have, let's say, a president who is on the spectrum? But I'm actually going to ask you, do you think in general,
Mm-hmm.
people who are on the autism spectrum make better or worse people in positions of authority?
This is a very loaded question, sir. Very loaded question.
I think it also depends. Obviously, a lot of it depends on the individual and where they sit on the spectrum. But I think that
That's why it's a loaded question.
I also was thinking about how I was watching that documentary about Ted Kaczynski the other day, and a lot of people think that he's autistic.
Yeah.
He was diagnosed with something different, which used to also be before they had autism. They used to diagnose people with schizo or something like that.
No, schizoaffective.
Yeah,
it's
it was
a personality disorder.
But it was what they diagnosed before they had autism as a diagnosis. He was diagnosed with that when he was younger. I was reading something about they used to diagnose people.
Autism has been around for a long time, man.
Anyway, point is he was
diagnosed with something else.
Right. But he has a lot of traits that are autistic. Anyway, the point is if he was autistic,
right.
One of the things he struggled with was he was a very young professor and all of his students hated him.
Right.
And a lot of that was probably because of his social deficits.
Yeah. And also his age.
That too. So it makes me think, how many of us are like that? Or do you think,
how many of us are Unabombers? I don't know. A lot, probably.
I think our social deficits are going to cause an issue a lot of times, but there also may be some benefits to being somebody who's in charge and on the spectrum.
I absolutely agree with that.
I think like being the president, for instance, getting elected would be very difficult for somebody on the spectrum. I think once they're actually in office, they would probably do a pretty good job unless they're just a horrible person.
I don't know. And I'm not saying good or bad. I'm not saying yes, they would do well or no, they wouldn't. But I think, yes, as you said, it depends on the person. But I think for a lot of the folks on the spectrum, the level ones where we're at, stuff like that, a lot of us are very practical. And not just practical, we call ourselves logical. And we have tendency to look at things not necessarily always taking into consideration the emotional response, the emotional reaction, the emotional effect we have on others. And so I think that's something that a president or somebody in that level of authority, I think that's something they need to take into consideration, the effect that they're having on people, not just the logical effect or the practical outcome, if you will, of the decisions they're making. But I think they also need to take into consideration the emotional impact that they're having and how other people are going to react to it. And I think that would actually pose a greater level of difficulty if a person was on the spectrum.
Well, that's why I said I think it would be harder for them to get elected, because I think the social issues and maybe not taking some of the emotional things into account,
right.
They might, the way they run their campaign, they might rub people the wrong way. Or they may not.
Guaranteed.
But if they got elected, I'm saying once they're in office, I think they may still have some of those issues.
Right.
So when it comes to the optics of the administration, people might not be happy with some of the things that they're doing, but I think at the end of the term that they probably would be able to do a good job and accomplish quite a bit, even if people felt like they didn't, or they hated that person for certain reasons.
Well, I don't know.
Which happens to politicians anyway. Because presidents get blamed for shit that they have nothing to do with.
I mean, the idea of whether they would get stuff done isn't even necessarily up to the person, because they've got to work with the other bodies of governance there to get things done. And I don't know. Like there might be somebody who is amazingly good at social stuff. They learned all that. They learned how to math super well, and they're able to be president. I don't know. I think some of the issues that a lot of us have, I think it would come into conflict when it comes to all of the pieces that a president needs to take into consideration. At the same time, I mean, would we get potentially more stuff done for our peeps? Yeah, most likely. But I think when it comes to like overall taking care of some of these social issues or the financial issues or, structural issues of the country, I think that there would be, I think some of it wouldn't necessarily be, I don't know. I just think there would be issues when it comes to.
So what you're
into
saying
account
is
the
you want to
effect.
just keep having some old white men.
I did not even remotely close to say that. Not even remotely close to say that.
So do you think that there are any, if we're talking about hierarchy and all that type of shit, do you think that there's anything structurally in the United States that kind of holds our peoples back?
Structurally.
Yeah.
Like
Institutionally, structurally, that could be, doesn't have to be politically necessarily, but it could also be just the way that society's set up. What do you think? So for instance, there are certain things that impact certain groups because of the way society's structured, right?
Right.
I'm saying, like, what do you think? What do you think out there that is that structurally impacts people on the spectrum?
So I think one of the things is because we still live in an NT world.
I would say,
I think very much so because we still live in an NT world. And that's not going to change nor go away anytime soon. But I think how that impacts us or limits us or whatnot is because we're still, like, there are still people who, even though they know you're on the spectrum, they still prompt and make demands of looking at people in the eye.
yeah.
And so they're still holding to that older kind of like societal norm, if you will. And that's really only a major societal norm in this country. And I guess in most of Europe too, but like there are other countries where you're not forced to make eye contact. In fact, to make eye contact can seem aggressive to some people. And so I think that's one of the things. I think the social contract that we all have to play by, the NT social contract, I think that's something that's very limiting to us. And I also think that the current understanding about autism is a limiting factor, but I think the only thing that's going to help make that go away is not even necessarily like more autistic people being more out there about being autistic, but I think more research needs to be done to understand what we can do about things and what we can't do about things, and basically, identifying a new set of social rules for us.
I think what we need to do is take all of the autistic people in the country, and we need to get our own city. We'll build our own town, our own city, and it's autistic only. And so you have to show your TISM card at the door when you come in, and we'll have a perfectly run, structured society that doesn't give a fuck about anyone's feelings, but runs really well.
There would be like 800 D&D, Dungeons and Dragons places, Warhammer shops, and Magic the Gathering shops, and I don't think there would be a whole lot of gyms. Not to say people in the spectrum don't go to the gym.
Only one TV channel and it plays nothing but Star Trek reruns.
Yeah, exactly. There's one TV channel in town, and it plays Star Trek and
Star
My Little
Wars Pony.
All day long. Oh my good God. Yeah.
Friendship is magic. That's the one.
Yeah, that's it.
The bronies.
That's it.
I don't know if bronies are artistic. I just
that would be probably the least social town in America.
It's fine. There would be some stuff. I mean, you have to play D&D with other people. I mean,
yes, you do.
Take turns playing Dungeon Master.
Yeah.
I roll my D20. I score 15 against my knowledge check.
I don't actually know the rules, but
yeah, but it's fucking funny.
I know they roll D20. They have 20-sided die, and I know you have your stats, and you roll, and you have to roll depending on what your actions you do.
That's right.
That's about all I know.
Okay, so I actually used to play D&D for a while.
Yeah, you know more about it than I do. I don't know.
Oh, not that much more.
I'm a level 12 paladin.
I mean, even when it comes to Magic the Gathering, dude, like when I used to do Magic the Gathering tournaments, like in person, you could absolutely tell who was and who wasn't on the spectrum in that damn room.
So, my Subway sandwich is here, so I need to take a break real quick. Can you pause the game?
You would always, like, I will say one thing. It was kind of apparent with some people being on the spectrum because even though they put a card, okay, and if you ever played Magic the Gathering before, you know what I'm talking about. They go and play a card, and they tap their mana, and they always turn the card a specific direct amount, right? There's always like this kind of 45-degree angle they put it
It's got to be uniform.
Yeah, and then they put the card out, and even though the card itself has very little on it, like there's no major special ability on it that somebody's got to read and follow the rules of, they put it out, they still read the card completely. Like the name of the card, the type of creature it is, the specifications.
Aren't they just OCD, Nick?
Could be.
I was being sarcastic.
I don't know if that's an OCD trait in that way.
No, but people think that anybody who like has to do things in a certain way is OCD, even though people who are on the spectrum a lot of times will have specific ways. Well, routine, they want everything to be uniform or routine. Right. So if you're tapping your lands, a lot of time you tap them all exactly the same.
Well, and that's misunderstandings about OCD. I mean, there's misunderstandings about a lot of disorders that have tendency to overlap, and people are like, well, I must be this, this, and this because I have all these different individual traits. But like when it comes to being on the spectrum, people on the spectrum get depressed. We have anxiety. That doesn't mean we also have clinical depression or major depressive disorder and an anxiety disorder. No, we have anxiety. We get depressed. Like we have those other things. Like there's a lot of folks that are combining the communities of ADHD and autism. Now, I don't know how much research there is that says, there's a big comorbidity link between the two of those. But I will say every time I hear somebody talk about how they're ADHD and autistic, they're like, well, I have a hard time paying attention to things. Okay.
Yeah, but ADHD people will also have a hard time paying attention to things unless it's something they're really into.
And that's an interesting part to it too, because I've known autistic folks who like they're not paying attention to you because they don't give a shit about what you're talking about. Right. And so they seem like they're not paying attention.
So it could be like that they have ADHD and they're autistic, or just be because of their autism that they have a lot of ADHD traits.
Right.
Like, because I know one of the common things about ADHD, people think that they can't focus on anything, which is not true. Yeah, they can. True. It's just if it's something that they're really into,
right,
they'll be able to focus on it.
Right.
But the problem is with people with ADHD is most of the time they're just fucking can't pay attention to things for long because they're just not interested, or they're bored, or they don't want to.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's the simplistic. But I'm just saying, like, if they like something enough, they'll pay attention to it.
Right.
Like if you're an ADHD person, but you can sit there and play video games for 4 hours because you're really into it, or skateboard or something like that. Because I grew up with people who had ADHD and they had a hard time fucking paying attention to anything.
Oh yeah.
But they would go and skateboard for like 5 hours after school because that's what they liked.
Yeah. My mom the other day just reminded me that initially I was diagnosed with ADHD when I was a kid.
I was too.
And then come to find out, look, this other thing.
Yeah, I was diagnosed. They gave me meds for it, and I took them for like a year and then stopped because
I probably took them for.
It turned me into a vegetable.
I don't know how an ADHD med could do that, but okay.
It made me feel like whatever. It's conversation for another time. But I felt a lot of the drugs that I was given for different things made me feel like I had it made me feel like I had no interest or no emotion about anything.
Mm-hmm. They flattened your affect.
But to the point where it actually made me feel worse because I felt like I couldn't enjoy anything. Almost like when you're depressed and you can't enjoy anything. It can make me feel like I had no feeling at all. And so I felt like a lot of the drugs, I thought that the way I felt was worse than just dealing with how I was. So
when I first got on my bipolar meds, the mood stabilizer that I take, I had a hard time continuing to take it because I started to feel like that too, that like my emotions were stunted, that my enjoyment of things was now muted, things like that. And I was starting to blame it on the medication. But then I was started to read about the medication and how it works. And well, yeah, because it's bringing down my symptomology. It's actually helping me manage, because medication for bipolar doesn't make it go away, but it lessens the severity of the episodes. So wait, I was getting this hyper and this manic, but now I've got a medication that's not letting me get to that point. It's a little less than that. Oh, okay. So I should feel a little more muted, if you will. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. because maybe this is how I should feel. Maybe I shouldn't have such extremes or intense emotionality.
So before we wrap up, I wanted to go back to the topic.
Yeah.
Power, hierarchy,
Yes.
authority, all that stuff. So as a member of the patriarchy, how do you feel about your
Jesus.
your power you have in society as a straight white male?
Well, one of those terms is not correct.
Sorry, as a cis white male who is straight passing. There you go.
Straight passing.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, I guess. I don't know. For a very long time, I didn't know that was a thing for me. Like, I still don't necessarily believe I hold power in that way. And that's not necessarily like me being ignorant of the privilege that being white and male in America kind of lends. And as you pointed out, straight passing. When it comes to like, for a very long time, I didn't know. But I mean, even to this day, I don't feel or have any inclination that because I'm a guy, I can get away with more, or because I'm a guy, I hold this or that more than anybody else. Because I mean, granted, in a lot of ways, I've been more surrounded with women, and so I hear the way they derogatorily talk about men and how they stereotype and their prejudices about men, and so in that regard, I never felt like
there are certain privileges and benefits that I'm sure we both experienced being white. Well,
let me restate. They've probably happened to us, but we didn't necessarily know that because of the privilege.
As a joke, not really a joke, but as I was pointing out the other day, because race is kind of a amorphous. I know I used that word earlier, but race is a construct, right?
It is. It's a social concept.
The funny thing is, I'm mostly Irish and Portuguese,
right?
And 50 years ago, I wouldn't have been considered white.
Right.
Because I'm those things. But nowadays, those are considered white, which is just funny how things change over time. But anyway, as a straight guy, I know there's certain things that I've benefited from. But also, because of some of my other issues, there are certain things that have negatively impacted me that other people might not be aware of and not have seen because of my mental issues, whatever you want to call them.
Right. And that's where I kind of like when people say you've had all these advantages because you're a white male in America. I'm also autistic and bipolar. I mean, like if I got hired over somebody else because I was a white male, trust me, I got fired real quick because I'm bipolar. And I have been fired for really stupid shit. And so like, even if I did get the advantage or the privilege that I'm afforded in this country because of those two label criterias, other things got in the way.
We really need to have a woman on sometime to talk about some of this stuff, because I like debating with women about kind of the differences between the way we treat men and women in society.
Yes.
Because I think that there are a lot of privileges and advantages to being a guy, but I think there's also a lot of privileges and advantages to being a woman.
I agree.
A lot of women you talk to will not admit or not acknowledge the fact that there's certain things that benefit them.
Yeah.
The stereotypes and some of the ways that we treat the genders, there's negative and positive even for some of the same things.
Yes.
Like something can be a negative and a positive at the same time. Like, because depending on the situation, it might benefit you one way or the other. Like people assuming that men might have like the answer. You know, a lot of times people will trust a man's answer over a woman's answer.
Especially if it's something that has to do with science or building something.
That can benefit you, but it can also work against you, right?
Yes.
Are assuming that men are more competent.
Right.
Women, right, being judged on their looks, that is not fair, and it plays against them, but it also can benefit them if you're a beautiful woman who gets
things because of it.
Yeah.
Hold on. I will say this much, because in both those regards, those are social concepts. Those are social stereotypes that we carry. The interesting part about it is, like, you said the one about being a beautiful woman, right?
Right.
Men are still judged on their looks.
Right, but we treat beautiful women in a different way than we treat pretty or attractive men.
Attractive men get just as many benefits just because they're pretty.
I think they do get some, but I think as a society, we value beauty more in women. And I will fight you over that.
No. I will say we openly discuss it more.
There's a reason why, the beauty industry is what it is when it comes to women, when it comes to cosmetics, makeup. Why is it that women do so well on OnlyFans and men don't?
Because
Why is
men
it
are
that-
pathetic and they're willing to pay money to watch
Why
a
is
woman
it-
sit around in a bikini.
Why is it that men who are attractive
Yep.
still don't make as much money as women who aren't very attractive on OnlyFans? Why is it that women make so much money on platforms like Instagram who have so many, because people care more about women's appearances? And I'm saying that works against them, but it also works in their favor, especially if they're attractive.
Right.
But we as a society value beauty in women more than we don't care as much about men's looks. We care about it, and attractive men still are treated better
Yes.
because they're attractive. But I'm
Yes.
saying that it outweighs. Like I'm saying in the case of women that it has a bigger impact.
Yeah, hold on.
They're able to get more from it.
I'm not saying that it's equal.
No,
like
no.
I'm not saying beautiful men have equal goodness because they're
No, I'm saying it's much
compared
easier
to a
for you to
woman
take
who's
advantage of
beautiful.
your beauty if you're a woman, is what I'm saying.
Yes.
If you're a very
In-
attractive woman, and let's say you're 23 and you're a super hot woman,
yeah.
the world is basically your oyster at that point. If you want to take
Relatively.
it, if you want to take advantage of that,
Uh-huh.
you can, because you know
Yes.
people will give you things and do things for you just because you're pretty.
Right. And in the same regard, and I think this is kind of an equality, an equal comparison kind of thing. You're talking about beauty, and women on certain things, on certain services will get more just because they're attractive.
Right.
In the same regard, the men, if they're showing their knowledge set in certain identified male direct or masculine kind of industries,
Right.
they will get more attention.
Which,
if they actually
Which is
know
why
more
I'd like
or
to have a
not.
conversation with actually having a woman here, or talk to a woman about a woman who's interested in gender and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because I think it's really
Yeah.
interesting. And this is something that I've mentioned to you and I've argued with you about in the past.
Right.
Is I think that like we're in a very weird place when it comes to gender, and when it comes to, and we might have even talked about this in the gender episode,
Mhm.
but we're in a really weird place when it comes to gender roles,
Yeah.
because
I agree.
we've erased some of the traditional gender roles. We've
Right.
rolled back some of it. Women are equal and all that stuff for all intents and purposes.
Yeah. But
I'm saying under the law, like
Right.
women have all the same rights that men do. Whether we treat men and women differently still, but I'm saying under the law we're pretty much equal. But
somebody is going to argue with you on that one.
well, name one law that applies to a woman that doesn't apply to a man, or vice versa.
Do you really want me to point this out?
There are a few maybe,
Uh-huh.
but and also we talked about yesterday with our friends about sentencing disparity and stuff like that, which actually
Yeah.
plays in women's favor because they're
It
usually
does.
sentenced less for
Yeah.
the same crimes. But anyway, my point is,
I was going to say like abortion laws directly
Well,
impact women more.
yeah,
than
and
men.
there's some laws that like favor women a lot of times, and not even just the laws, but how they're actually the laws are enforced.
Mhm.
Or like when it comes to family and stuff like that,
Yeah.
the courts typically favor women or mothers
Yes.
over fathers, but that's not the point.
Mhm.
My point is that we had certain gender role expectations of men and women back, if you go, 100 years ago,
Yeah.
and we've made a lot of progress in gender equality.
Right.
But we're in a weird period because we want men and women to be treated equally. We
Mhm.
want to all be treated as equals,
Right.
but we still have unfair expectations on both of the genders about the way they should act.
Yes.
So like a lot of women still expect men to do certain traditionally masculine things,
yes.
and a lot of men still expect women to do traditionally feminine things. So it's like we're equal, but we're still not, because we treat each other as though we're not. So
Right.
they're in this weird place in between
Mhm.
where on paper, we're supposed to be equal, but we don't treat each other that way.
No,
Like
not
a
at
lot of women, this is changing quite a bit, especially with the younger generations like Gen Z and millennials and stuff.
Yeah.
The women don't always expect men to pay, but even up until like recently, a lot of times women will consider themselves, men and women, they say, well, we're equal. And when it comes to dating, we're equal, but they still expect a man to plan the day and to pay
Right.
for a date and all that stuff, because they still want that traditional part of it.
Right.
But so that's why,
And there's even the expectation that the man is the one who has to initiate the conversation out.
and not all women are like that. Like
No,
I'm
not
dating
all,
somebody
not all.
who's not like that. And I've dated women who aren't like that, but I also dated a lot of women who do still have those expectations. But at the same time, they don't see how it's contradictory to be
Yeah.
wanted to be treated
Yeah.
like a guy, quote unquote, or be
Right.
treated equally, but then at the same time expect special privileges because you're a woman. Like it doesn't make any sense.
What's interesting is like this actually ties into our topic a little bit
Yeah.
about power dynamics, about understanding our power. And,
Like,
and
I'm
also
a
fighting.
woman, I'm strong, I'm independent, I'm equal to you, but I want you to pay for all of my dates and I want you to take care of me.
Right.
Well, then how are you equal if I'm taking care of you?
Valid point.
But I men do. I'm not saying that men don't like. There's not certain things that men do that annoy women when it comes to that too. I'm just speaking from the male perspective about
Right.
some of the things that don't make sense where we say we want to be equal, but then we don't act that way.
Yes.
So we're in a weird kind of like in the middle. We haven't gotten to the place where we truly have gender equality because we don't act that way, even if we have it on paper.
Yep.
But we also don't live in the 1940s and 1950s where women are all homemakers, right? Women are out working in society. They're, they have freedoms and stuff like that. We just don't treat each other that way.
In a lot of ways, there's a lot of social contract stuff when it comes to
we
that.
still expect
Social
men to do certain
expectations.
things. We still expect women to do certain things, even
Yeah.
though we're supposed to be equals.
Right. Yeah. And we say we're going to respect people's differences, but then we still hold people to those other expectations.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I just
All
want to
right.
thank everyone here for listening to us.
Absolutely.
If you have anything you want to say, or if you want to say I'm a sexist, misogynist asshole, go ahead and leave it in the comments.
Yep.
Um,
Leave us a message.
if you're a woman who would like to talk to us, let me know. Send me a DM.
Yeah, we would very much appreciate actually having that conversation that Steve was talking about.
I advocate for having more women and more people from different backgrounds on the show. I would like to have people who aren't like us here to talk about especially if you're autistic and you're not like us.
Right. Like I said at the beginning of the show, we do not presume to be experts. So if you have a different point of view, if you come from a different background, if you any of that difference kind of opinion stuff, we would love to talk to you because we are very much into understanding people as a whole. So we'd love to hear somebody else.
Especially people as a whole if you're a woman.
Yeah.
Just kidding. That was a bad joke.
Wow.
Anyway. That was a sexist joke. I'm sorry. So before we go,
Yes.
Just want to thank you for listening once again.
Mhm.
And I wanted to give you another update on Nick. He is 93% neurotypical now. His neurodivergence has been almost eradicated. We had brain scans done earlier this evening. They're going to be up online on the website soon. You'll see his brain scans and you'll see how far he has come with the homemade autism cure tincture that I have developed right here in our coffee shed lab.
One day somebody's going to piece together all of the times you've said this and take them completely out of context.
I'm going to get sued for saying that I have an autism cure.
Yeah, it's going to be hilarious when people take it out of context. Anyway, thank you very much. Please leave some comments. Listen to us as much as possible. Share it to your friends. Follow us on Facebook. It'd be much appreciated. Thank you very much. Have a great day.